When the search party reached the Thompson cabin on the morning of February 9th, 1876, they found the door unlatched, the interior warm from a fire that had been burning recently enough that coals still glowed red in the stove, and food on the table that was still warm to the touch. But the Thompson family, Father James, Mother Sarah, and their 2 children aged 8 and 5, were not present, had left no note explaining their absence, and had departed so recently that the physical evidence of their presence remained fresh, while all trace of the people themselves had vanished. The warmth itself was what created the deepest unease among the searchers. If the family had been gone for hours, the cabin would have cooled. If they had been gone for days, the fire would have died completely. But the temperature and the glowing coals suggested departure within the past hour, perhaps less, suggesting that whatever had caused the Thompson family to leave their cabin had occurred very recently, and had occurred so suddenly that they had not taken time to bank the fire or clear the table or secure their home before leaving. Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing examples of recent disappearance ever documented in frontier records. In the years when families living in isolated cabins could vanish without immediate discovery, when search parties sometimes arrived days or weeks after disappearances occurred, when evidence had time to grow cold and ambiguous, there lived a family who disappeared so recently before searchers arrived that the cabin still held their warmth, and the food they had been eating remained on the table, yet the family themselves were gone, as completely as if they had never been present. Leave a comment where you're watching from as we trace the boundary between disappearance that happens in the past and disappearance that happened so recently that evidence of life remains while life itself has vanished. This video is a work of fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Before we enter that warm cabin and try to understand what very recent absence means, consider what timing meant to frontier search parties and why experienced trackers understood that fresh evidence made tracking easier, but that extremely fresh evidence suggesting departure within minutes or hours, created different questions than evidence suggesting departure days earlier. Normal disappearances left trails that cooled over time. Fresh disappearances suggested urgent departures where normal preparation had been impossible or unnecessary. The Thompson family had lived in their cabin approximately 18 miles northeast of what would eventually become West Plains, Missouri, since 1873. James Thompson was a trapper who worked territory he knew well. Sarah managed the household and helped with trap maintenance, and their 2 children, Michael age 8 and Anna age 5, were healthy and showed no behavioral concerns that neighbors had observed during occasional visits. The family was known to be competent, careful, and experienced with wilderness living. The winter of 1875 to 1876 had been severe, but manageable. The Thompsons had adequate supplies, had maintained contact with the nearest neighbors, the Crawford family who lived approximately 5 miles south, through early January, and had given no indication during those contacts that they were experiencing difficulties beyond normal winter hardships. The last confirmed contact between the Thompson and Crawford families occurred on January 21st, when James Thompson visited the Crawford homestead to trade furs for salt. He reported that his family was well, that they had sufficient supplies to last through remainder of winter, and that he expected to make contact again in late February when weather moderated. Crawford found nothing unusual in Thompson's manner or in his report of family conditions. 3 weeks later, on February 8th, Crawford began to feel concern about the Thompson family. 3 weeks between contacts during severe winter was normal, but something about the timing made Crawford uneasy. He decided to check on the Thompsons, to verify they were managing winter adequately, and to offer assistance if assistance was needed. Crawford set out on the morning of February 9th, bringing his neighbor Daniel Morrison to help with the journey through snow that remained deep despite some recent melting. The 5-mile journey to the Thompson cabin took approximately 3 hours through difficult terrain. As they approached the Thompson cabin through the forest, Crawford noticed smoke rising from the chimney. This was a good sign. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant the family was present and active. He called out as they emerged from the tree line into the clearing where the cabin stood. No response came, but this was not unusual. The cabin was well insulated, and voices from outside might not be heard clearly inside, especially if wind was blowing, or if the family was engaged in activities that created noise. Crawford and Morrison reached the cabin door. Crawford knocked, called out again, waited for response. Silence came from inside. Crawford felt the first stirring of concern, tried the door and found it unlatched. He pushed it open. Warmth flowed out from the cabin interior. The temperature difference between outside and inside was immediately noticeable. The cabin was warm, not merely less cold than outside, but genuinely warm in the way that cabins with good fires burning became warm. Crawford stepped inside, Morrison following. The cabin was empty of people, but it was full of evidence that people had been present very recently. The stove in the center of the room radiated heat. Crawford could feel it from several feet away. He opened the stove door and saw coals glowing red, saw wood that had burned down but that had not yet turned to ash, saw a fire that had been burning within the past hour and that might have been tended as recently as 30 minutes before Crawford opened the cabin door. On the table sat 2 plates with food, bread and preserved meat, the kind of simple meal that frontier families ate regularly. Crawford touched one of the plates and found it warm. Not hot, but warmer than room temperature, suggesting the food had been placed on the plate recently, had been eaten from, or was about to be eaten from when whatever happened happened. Crawford and Morrison stood in the warm cabin, trying to understand what they were seeing. A family had been present very recently. The fire proved it. The warm food proved it. But the family was not present now, and nothing in the cabin suggested where they had gone or why they had left without banking the fire or clearing the table. Morrison checked the sleeping area. The beds were made, or at least were not in disarray, suggesting urgent departure from sleep. Clothing hung on pegs, boots stood by the door. The children's toys lay in the corner, where children apparently stored them. Everything suggested normal occupancy, normal daily routine, normal life continuing until very recently. Crawford examined the cabin more carefully, looking for anything that would explain sudden departure. No sign of struggle was visible. No blood, no overturned furniture, no indication that violence had occurred. No note lay on the table explaining emergency that would require immediate departure. No evidence suggested that the family had packed for travel. If they had left intentionally, they had left without gathering the warm clothing and supplies that winter travel would require. He stepped outside and examined the area around the cabin. Snow surrounded the structure, and in that snow should be tracks if the family had departed on foot. The snow near the door was trampled from normal daily movement, bringing in firewood, stepping outside briefly, the kind of traffic that cabin living created. But no clear trail led away from the cabin into the surrounding forest. No tracks suggested that 4 people had walked away from the cabin recently enough that fresh snow had not covered their passage. Morrison joined him outside. They walked the perimeter of the cabin, examining the snow carefully, looking for any indication of direction the family might have taken if they had left. They found nothing that would explain departure without tracks. The snow should have preserved footprints for hours after they were made. It was cold enough that the snow remained firm, not melting enough to fill tracks quickly. Yet no tracks led away from the cabin beyond the trampled area immediately surrounding it. They returned inside the warm cabin. Crawford looked at the warm food on the table, at the beds that were made, at the belongings that remained in their places. The family had been present recently, but they were not present now, and there were no tracks showing where they had gone. Over the following days, more extensive searching occurred. Men from nearby homesteads came to help, bringing experience with tracking and with winter searching. They examined the Thompson cabin carefully, documented what they found, and attempted to determine through systematic investigation what Crawford and Morrison had been unable to determine through initial observation. They searched the area surrounding the cabin in expanding circles, looking for tracks that initial examination had missed. They found animal tracks, found old tracks from days or weeks before, that showed the normal pattern of the Thompson family moving between cabin and woodpile and necessary locations near the structure. But they found no fresh tracks leading away from the cabin. No evidence that 4 people had departed through the snow during the hours or days immediately before the search party arrived. The wilderness beyond the immediate cabin area was searched systematically. If the family had left through some route that did not create visible tracks near the cabin, they would have moved in some direction through the forest, and that movement should be discoverable through careful tracking. Teams spread through the surrounding terrain, examining snow for any sign of passage. They found nothing suggesting recent movement of multiple people through areas that would be the logical routes away from the cabin. As weeks passed with no discovery of the Thompson family, the search decreased. Spring thaw brought renewed searching. The hope was that melting snow might reveal tracks or bodies that winter conditions had concealed. The thaw revealed nothing. The Thompson family was never found. By summer, the cabin was dismantled. We have reached the end of this journey through one of the most disturbing examples of recent disappearance in frontier history. A family who had been present recently enough that the fire they had tended still burned, and the food they had been eating remained warm, but who were gone completely by the time searchers arrived. If you've made it this far on this journey through territory where warmth remains after people vanish, consider subscribing to Commutales for more stories that explore the boundaries between presence and absence. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on what might have caused the Thompson family's disappearance. And if this story resonated with you, a like helps bring these narratives to more people. Until our next journey, remember that somewhere in the Ozark wilderness, there was once a cabin that search parties found warm, where food on the table had not yet cooled, where fire in the stove still glowed, but where the family who had been present minutes or hours before had vanished so completely that no evidence of their departure remained except the warmth they had left behind.